We now have the pleasure to present in an interview one of the pioneer amateur wireless experimenters of the United States, Mr. Charles E. Apgar of Westfield, New Jersey. Mr. Apgar was one of the first to experiment in the early development of wireless sending and receiving back in the days of 1910 and on. Perhaps the culmination of his work was in the discovery with his early phonograph recordings of non-neutral information being sent to Germany from a radio station in Long Island. Now, Mr. Apgar, how long have you been interested in radio?
Since early November 1910.
That was a long time ago for radio. What was the occasion then?
It was having read in my morning newspaper of a cashier in a New York banking house, Mr. W.L. Welch, taking wireless election returns at his home in New Jersey from station OHX, the New York Herald, giving the election returns, although they broadcast regularly every night in Morse code at 9 o'clock the news of the day.
Oh, but wireless had been in operation a number of years before 1910, had it not?
Oh, yes. Marconi was the first to commercialize wireless way back in 1895 and 96.
Of course, this wireless in Morse code was very different from our broadcasting today. They're both done with transmitters and without wires. But in the early days, all you could hear was a series of dots and dashes, I understand. While today you have music and the human voice and every other possible sound. That difference, as I understand it, is due chiefly to the invention of the radio tubes.
Yes, to the radio tube, first used by Dr. Fleming and improved by Dr. DeForest, and by development of special circuits in the radio set by Major Armstrong and others.
But now again, Mr. Apgar, after 1910, how did your interest in wireless develop?
Well, I'll have to go back way back of 1910 for this, because as early as 1885, I took up and studied electricity as a hobby, made electric motors, some are in existence, telephones, and various electrical devices, and was definitely interested in the development of the subject. This hobby reached its climax in 1915, when I was called on by the United States Secret Service to help them investigate the alleged non-neutrality of the Telefunken station at Sayville, Long Island.
Wow, that's very interesting. What was the Telefunken station at Sayville doing at the time?
Well, this station was German-owned, at least German-subsidized. It was operated by Germans, used solely wireless instruments of German construction.
See.
It operated primarily with POZ, now N, near Berlin, Germany, although they could work with any station in the world. It was about the most powerful thing ever built at that time.
Well, what was the nature of their business?
To every appearance and indication, they were all commercial messages and had been operating from here since the beginning for years.
But what made the United States government suspicious of them?
A definite evidence of non-neutrality, as our government placed 3 sensors there to OK transmitted messages. Also, operators of 2 United States stations, Fire Island and Arlington, were copying by earphones all messages transmitted. This procedure failed to furnish the government with the necessary incriminating evidence so much desired.
And which you suspected lay behind this all the time.
Oh, yes. The government suspected this station all the time. Hence, the United States Secret Service was instructed to make a complete investigation. W.J. Flynn, chief of the United States Secret Service and a most noted detective, appealed to L.R. Crum, chief radio inspector, Department of Commerce, for suggestions as to the best plan of procedure.
Well, did Flynn know anything about wireless at that time?
Absolutely nothing.
I see.
In fact, very few people did.
Well, that's quite true, I guess.
Just then, just at this time, a very strange coincidence happened. Mr. Crum had spent 5 hours at my amateur station the previous night, operated my homemade set, and listened to my many phonographic records which I had made from many wireless transmissions of other stations that I was always able to pick up. You see, I had been most fortunate in having constructed a very efficient receiving set, the one now on exhibition in your museum on the 4th floor.
Oh, yes, I see.
Using one tube only, and that was a mongrel, telegraphic code signals could be heard and read over 600 feet from my wireless room through an open window. So you see, it is very easy to make phonographic records.
Well, you certainly had a strong receiver, Mr. Apgar. Well, how did Chief Flynn, how was he impressed by Crum's suggestion to call you in on that important job?
Chief Flynn requested an immediate appointment with me, at which time I was instructed to furnish the Secret Service Bureau with copies taken from phonographic records of all messages sent to Germany every night for 2 weeks. They began at 11 o'clock at night at Sayville, sending messages to Germany until 2 o'clock, sometimes 2:30. I seldom got to bed in the morning before 3 o'clock.
So were these records made on those round cylinders like those we have here in our museum on the 4th floor?
Yes. The phonographic machine you have on exhibition for the tour parties is the original, identical machine on which I recorded these German messages.
And you played them back on the same machine?
Yes. After making the record, I went to bed and slept. In the morning, I played them back, and as I listened to them, I transmitted the telegraphic code into words and messages, and here I have 6 or 7 pages of the original copies I made of those messages from the Telefunken station.
Did any of them appear to have a significant meaning to the Secret Service?
Oh, yes. Here's one I have dated June the 18th, 1915. This message was sent by Captain Boyed. In fact, he sent a great many. Boyed got into a lot of trouble shortly afterwards and was called back home to Germany at the request of the United States government.
Yes, I remember his name quite well.
This was one of the most incriminating pieces of evidence ever sent through the station. And as a result, 1 month later, July the 8th, the government took it over.
And that was due to your recording work of their messages.
And after 3 days' work, Chief Flynn confided to me that the station was to be taken over by the United States government on evidence supplied by me. This came up because if the work I furnished had not been of value, I was willing to give up the contract. But Chief Flynn said, go ahead, Apgar, with the work as originally planned.
And that means, Mr. Apgar, that you were selling automobiles up to each evening and then at night working over these recordings until pretty early morning. Well, you knew your recordings had given them the information. How long did you keep on taking messages?
14 nights. And on the 8th of July, 1915, as this clipping from the New York World will show you, the government took over the Sayville, Long Island wireless station. Secretary of Commerce Redfield revealed at that time that the Sayville station was in communication with stations in Germany, and the messages from this Long Island station were either under control of other German authorities or the Imperial German Post Office, one for control of military intelligence and the other commercial business. To grant a license to such a station, the government constituted a non-neutral act.
Yes, and of course we were neutral then in 1915. Were there other comments on your work and fine help to the Secret Service which proved by your taking phonographic records of the German messages a basis for seizing the station?
Yes, indeed. The general manager of the Sayville station, Charles G. Frank, said when he was informed of my work, the statement that Mr. Apgar can record messages sent out by wireless on a phonographic cylinder is hardly worth discussing. That is physically impossible. I never heard of it being done.
Well, you fooled him. Well, I can understand him saying that in 1915. But how long had you been making these recordings, Mr. Apgar?
Well, I have here a letter from the Atlantic Communication Company, which operated the Sayville station, signed by Mr. Gomez, operations manager, who asked me to bring in to him 1 or 2 of my phonographic records made of their station. And on February the 9th, 1914, over a year before Frank said it was impossible, I delivered personally to Mr. Gomez 2 phonographic records of messages sent out by the Sayville station, dated November the 3rd, 1913, and November the 12th, 1913.
Yeah.
So you see, I've been making these records about 2 years, almost 2 years, before Frank said it was impossible.
Yes, I see. Well, this phonograph recording of wireless messages, which we have on exhibit on our NBC 4th floor museum, is at least 20 years old then.
Yes, it is one of the original records.
Well, I think, Mr. Apgar, it would be very interesting, and we have the time, to hear it played now.
Well, of course, what you will hear will only be the Morse code signals in this message.
Yes.
That's all we had at that time. No voice, no music, just a lot of dots and dashes. This that you are about to hear is one of the original records that I made 20 years ago.
I see. Now, Mr. Apgar is putting on the little round record cylinder on the old machine, and we shall now listen to it. Scratch on that record.
That's some hairline on just that scratch a little on the surface.
Now, Mr. Apgar, I'm sorry to say I don't read code, but that's very interesting. What did that record have to say we just heard?
Well, that particular record was news of the day sent out from the New York Herald station down at the Battery by WHB. Now, here's an example of two which I took from the air in 1915 from the Telefunken station, and which were non-neutral messages. One reads, "Send always invoice before shipping knives."
Well, Mr. Apgar, that sounds harmless enough.
Well, in reality, that meant in code instructions to the German submarines about enemy shipping.
Oh.
Now, here's another one, and this is a complete message. "Is our office running as usual, with Sampler alive and attending? Please wire." That also was instructions to the waiting submarines.
Mm-hmm. Now, your recordings of 20 years ago.
Well, just a second, and I'll have one going.
Mr. Apgar is changing the little round black wax cylinders on the machine. This old and original Edison home phonograph machine is sitting right by our microphone. Mr. Apgar bought it, as he said, for $5 20 years ago, and it was at that time bought second-hand. We have heard the original old wax phonograph recordings of early telegraph code messages sent in the first days of wireless transmission, and similar to the ones now in the United States government's possession at Washington, D.C., used by the United States Secret Service to discover the non-neutrality of the German Telefunken station at Sayville, Long Island, in 1915. These original records in the old phonograph machine are now on exhibit in the National Broadcasting Company's museum on the 4th floor of the RCA building, Radio City, New York, and open for inspection to the public. The interview of Mr. Charles E. Apgar is a presentation of the National Broadcasting Company, RCA building, Radio City.